Peace, love, liberty, radio.
And the walls come crashing down as the war at home reaches your town. You have no choice, it's safe and clean. We all submit to the war machine.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. It is 2016. It's the year that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. And now that it's here, there's still months to go before I can finally relax. And let me explain what I'm talking about. If you've listened to the show for a while, you know that I am a candidate for president. I'm currently seeking the Libertarian Party's nomination for president for the election in November. So, and between now and November, yeah, I'll have times where I'm not, doing something towards either the campaign or something else. But once the election happens in November, it's going to be like a giant weight being lifted off my shoulder. Unless by some weird fluke of, some weird fluke, some strange turn of events, I wind up getting elected, in which case I won't be able to relax for like 4.5 more years. But nonetheless, it is the year that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. And hopefully it winds up being a good year. And the year is starting off very pleasantly for Mr. Davi Barker, the proprietor of ShinyBadges.com. Davi is also known as the Muslim Agorist. And why is it starting off as a good year for Davi Barker? Well, Davi, with one of his books, Authoritarian Sociopathy, that book in particular was recognized as the Book of the Month for January 2016 by Freedom Book Club. And if you've listened to the show, I've talked a little bit about relaunching Freedom Book Club. It relaunched back at the beginning of December or late November, I forget. But the first voting took place during December, and Davi Barker wound up winning that with 2.5 votes. The first place runner-up, or rather the second place, the first runner-up was my book, A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty. The other finalists for January Book of the Month were Healing Our World, the 4th edition by Dr. Mary Ruwart, and Freedom by Adam Gokesh. The voting is now open for the February 2016 Book of the Month. The finalists are Survivor Max, Too Smart to Die, Volume 1, also written by Davi Barker. Clockwork Imperium, Stories 1 through 3 by J.P. Medved. Bite, The Beginning of the Bite Series, Volume 1 by Gardner Goldsmith. And Anarchy in New England by Joe Jarvis. Those are the 4 finalists. And remember, if you are a member of the Freedom Book Club, and you can join the Freedom Book Club for free, if you're a member of the Freedom Book Club, your vote weighs more heavily. So if you are a free member of the Freedom Book Club, your vote counts 1.5 times the regular vote. If you are a paid member, and you can join for as little as $5 per month, then your vote winds up carrying more weight. $5 member, your vote carries 3 times. If you're a $20 per month member, not only does your vote count more, it counts 10 times, you also wind up receiving a copy of the Book of the Month each month. And then there's the gold member at $50. The vote counts 20 times, and you get a copy of the Book of the Month. All proceeds going into the FreedomBook.Club wind up that they'll be given as a cash prize to the winner of the book of the year. And all of the books of the month are eligible for book of the year. And I think I'm going to wind up in December having, or either November or December, having a second chance book of the month, because that's one of the things that Ferb did with the original Freedom Book Club, is he would take the first runner-up for the previous however many months, put them in basically a second chance poll to give some of the more popular books a second chance to wind up getting book of the month. So look for that second chance poll coming up in either November or December. And again, FreedomBook.Club is the website there. Go and vote. If you are not a subscriber, and again, you can subscribe, or actually you can register for free. Subscriber is a paid thing, and I'm using the terms specifically for reasons because that's what it is listed as on the website FreedomBook.Club. So if you're a registered user, make sure you are logged in when you vote so that your vote then carries the extra weight. Because if you're not logged in, well, I have no way of knowing who's a registered voter and who is not a registered voter. So if you're not logged in, your vote does not carry the extra weight. Again, FreedomBook.Club. And congratulations to Davi Barker, the author of Authoritarian Sociopathy, for winning the January 2016 Book of the Month award. Now, this is the beginning of the year, but I like going through some of these year-in review sort of things, and I've got one from Reporters Without Borders. And I love what this organization does and things that they try to do, and a lot of the statistics that they tabulate are things that you're not finding elsewhere. And one of the things that they recently came out with was the roundup of journalists killed worldwide in 2015. And you may recall I went through a couple of weeks ago the roundup of journalists that were incarcerated or have otherwise been kidnapped across the globe. Well, now they have the roundup of journalists that have been killed during the previous year. And there have been 110 professional journalists killed in 2015. There were also 27 citizen journalists and 7 media workers. Again, it's not clear what the difference between a media worker, a citizen journalist, and a professional journalist, although one can speculate that a professional journalist is one who is hired full-time to be a journalist, but I'm not sure what differentiates that from a media worker. Maybe it's someone that works as support staff for the journalist, the professional or citizen. The numbers here break down of the 110 professional journalists killed in the last year. 49 were murdered or knowingly targeted. 18 others were killed in the course of their work, and 43 were killed for unclear reasons. Now, those that were knowingly targeted, they were deliberately killed or targeted because they were journalists. Now, stay tuned. I've got more info from Reporters Without Borders.
Why do they hate us? Is libertarianism compatible with Islam? Davi Barker answers these questions and more in Voluntary Islam and Other Essays. He advances the voluntarist cause with analysis of the confluence of values between Islam and libertarianism, as well as contemporary movements from the Tea Party to the Arab Spring. Voluntary Islam by Davi Barker is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. Bitcoin Not Bombs is a launching pad for nonprofits and social entrepreneurs into the financial freedom of the Bitcoin economy. Bitcoin Not Bombs offers premium publicity campaigns designed to facilitate an organization's adoption of Bitcoin as a payment system. Bitcoin Not Bombs is fully committed to being the hub of the nonprofit sector of the Bitcoin economy, maximizing the potential cross-promotion of all our clients and commercial partners. To learn more, visit bitcoinnotbombs.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates, like Namecheap, Spendabit, and Amazon at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. That's shop.fppradio.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry. Online at fppradio.com.
Now, before I continue here with what I find to be very important, very useful information from a very important organization, Reporters Without Borders, I want to make sure that I tell you about a very important website, Liberty.me. Liberty.me is a social network, but it's so much more than just a social network. You hear me talk about it every week, at least if you listen every week. So why aren't you using Liberty.me? You don't have to worry about the internet trolls. That's the biggest draw for me, is that you don't have to worry about the internet trolls. You don't have to worry about getting into flame wars with people or people trying to start flame wars with you just to, make your blood boil or get a response. And the reason is because Liberty.me is a paid service. And internet trolls don't want to have to pay to be internet trolls. So go sign up, Liberty.me. Yes, you can post pictures of your cat. You can join groups. You can join forum or participate in forums, chat rooms, download ebooks, download some audio. And that's some of the stuff you're not getting on Facebook or any of the other social networking sites. So go, Liberty.me, use referral code FPP Radio when you sign up, and you will save 10% on your membership. So back now into the story from Reporters Without Borders. There were, again, 49 journalists that were murdered or knowingly targeted because they were journalists. There were 18 others that were killed in the course of their work, but not necessarily targeted for being journalists. And the remainder, which would be 43 journalists killed in the line of work, it's unclear what the reasons were surrounding their death, meaning that the statisticians over at Reporters Without Borders have not been able to establish with certainty that they were targeted as journalists, meaning some of them could have been, some of them maybe not, but it's unclear. 36% of those killed in the line of work were in war zones. 64% were outside of war zones. 97% of those journalists killed in the line of duty were killed within the country where they live. 3% were foreigners in the country where they were killed. 2 female journalists were killed, one in France, one in Somalia. And Reporters Without Borders writes, the very high number of journalists killed in 2015, bringing the total since 2005 to 787 in the course of their work or in connection with it, is attributable to the increasingly deliberate use of violence against journalists. It is also indicative of the failure of initiatives designed to protect journalists. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said on August 6th of this year in his annual report on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity, quote, I am deeply concerned about the failure to reduce the frequency and scale of targeted violence that journalists face and the near absolute impunity for such crimes. Non-state groups, meaning groups that are not recognized as state governments or official government entities, non-state groups perpetuate targeted atrocities while too many governments do not comply with their obligations under international law. Addressing the UN Security Council on May 27th of this year, Reporters Without Borders Secretary General Christophe Delors called for the creation of a specific mechanism for enforcing international law on the protection of journalists, without which Resolution 2222, like Resolution 1738 of 2006, could end up being a good resolution and nothing more. 2/3 of the journalists killed worldwide in 2014 were killed in war zones, whereas in 2015 it was the exact opposite. 2/3 were killed in countries, quote-unquote, at peace. Journalists can even be killed in capitals far from armed conflicts, as we saw in the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris on January 7th. Charlie Hebdo publisher Rees said on October 8th, "We almost never sent journalists to war zones. On January 7th, war came to us." Now, I'm not going to get into the situation surrounding the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, some of the things that the publisher of Charlie Hebdo did to possibly provoke such an attack. And I'm not at all condoning the response to Charlie Hebdo, but I'm not, at the same time, I am not condoning the provocation by the publishers of Charlie Hebdo, to where they were basically calling for the slaughter of millions of people. And, well, free speech does not mean that you are free from reactions of other people. It means that you're free from being prosecuted for your speech, as long as your speech cannot be construed to be a legitimate threat. Now, continuing here with the report from Reporters Without Borders, killed in connection with their work as journalists. In the case of 43 of the journalists killed, the motives or reasons for their deaths remain unclear because of the lack of thorough and impartial official investigations, the lack of good faith on the part of governments, or the difficulty of investigating in unstable or lawless regions. These unclear reasons reflect the problem of impunity for crimes of violence against journalists in many regions of the world, specifically Latin America, Asia Pacific, the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa. The 5 deadliest places in the world for journalists. Iraq had 11 journalists killed in 2015. And let me rephrase here. Not the government necessarily of Iraq, but within the boundaries of the country of Iraq. 11 journalists were killed in 2015, 9 of which were killed in the course of their work, or they were knowingly targeted for being journalists. 2 were killed for unclear reasons. In Syria, there were 10 journalists killed, 1 for unclear reasons. The other 9 were targeted or otherwise killed in the course of their work. France had 8 journalists killed, or rather, there were 8 journalists killed in France, 8 killed in Yemen, 7 in South Sudan, 9 in India, 4 of whom were killed for unclear reasons. There were also 8 journalists killed in Mexico, 5 of whom it is unclear if they were targeted for being journalists. The Philippines and Honduras also saw 7 journalists killed, respectively. All of them in Honduras for unclear reasons. In the Philippines, 4 of them for unclear reasons. The report here, again, continues. The Charlie Hebdo attack made France the 3rd deadliest country for journalists in 2015. It was an unprecedented tragedy. A Western country had never suffered a massacre of this kind in the past. Charlie Hebdo's journalists and employees had been living under close protection ever since. Some of them still have to keep changing their places of residence. In May, the Charlie Hebdo journalist, who covers religious issues and Islam, said she lived part of the time in hotels and the rest of the time with relatives. She said it was very hard to work while facing threats of this kind, and that it was impossible to do reporting with a police escort. There's definitely more from the report here from Reporters Without Borders. Stay tuned.
When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
Hey, this is Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends radio show. I've been working with computer programmer Derek Slopey to create Fiend Phone. I'm using Fiend Phone right now to talk with and record one of my co-hosts in real time. Take it, Davi.
Hey, this is Davi Barker, and I'm 1,000 miles away from Michael, but we sound like we're in the same room.
We sure do, Davi. So, Davi, please tell the nice people more about Fiend Phone.
Fiend Phone is free, open-source software that opens up a global world of possibilities for collaborative, high-quality remote voice media production, and I'm digging it.
People can try the Windows beta version of Fiend Phone right now at fiendphone.com. But we're also raising money to vastly improve Fiend Phone and vastly improve independent talk media worldwide.
So go to fiendphone.com to help out. Who will build the audio roads? We will, with your help.
That's fiendphone.com. FEENPHONE.com. Foxtrot, Echo, November, phone.com.
Fiend Phone. I never knew remote audio could be this good.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
In Aleppo, which is in northern Syria, journalists were caught in the crossfire. What with Bashar al-Assad's forces, militant groups, Kurdish forces, and coalition airstrikes, the Syrian city of Aleppo is a minefield for professional and citizen journalists. Caught between the various parties to the conflict since 2011, journalists are liable to end up as collateral victims, being taken hostage by non-state groups such as the Islamic State, the al-Nusra Front, or the Free Syrian Army, or they also risk being arrested by the Assad regime. Mosul, which is a city currently controlled by the Islamic State since June 2014, is in northern Iraq and is considered an information black hole. In this city alone, the jihadi group has been responsible for 48 abductions and 13 executions of journalists and citizen journalists in the past 18 months. Around 60 professional and non-professional journalists and media workers have fled the city, while those that are still there cannot work for fear of reprisal. Disinformation reigns in this environment. Contact with the outside world is banned or restricted by the Islamic State, which also controls communications and the internet. Yemen, the Houthi militias sow terror in Sana'a. After a rapid advance through northern Yemen, Houthi rebel militias seized control of the capital city of Sana'a in September of 2014. Thereafter, they attacked media outlets with heavy weapons and abducted journalists affiliated with Al-Islah, a Sunni coalition opposed to the Zaidi Shia Houthis. More than a year later, the only journalists still working in Sana'a are those that support the Houthi rebel militias. 6 journalists and 3 media workers were murdered or killed in the course of their work in Yemen in 2015. At least 15 professional journalists, citizen journalists, and media workers are currently believed to be held by the Houthis, who are continuing their southward advance. Those not being targeted by the Houthis are exposed to airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition that is trying to halt the Houthi advance. The Saudi-led coalition also is running a blockade, preventing nearly any food from coming into Yemen, because Yemen has to import 90% of all of their food because, well, Yemen's a desert. India, there's mounting violence from organized crime in India. In Mexico, and there's a paragraph here about India. I'm just going to skip down and read some of the headlines of some of these paragraphs. In Mexico, there's no refuge possible for journalists. And I'm actually going to read this one because Mexico is so close to home, if you will. It's the southern neighbor to the United States, so most people consider, oh, well, they're right next door. Mexico continues to be Latin America's deadliest country for journalists, with 8 killed in 2015, 5 of them for still unclear reasons. The most dangerous regions are the southern states of Veracruz and Oaxaca. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's spelled Oaxaca. I believe, based on my limited knowledge of Espanol, that is pronounced Oaxaca, not Oaxaca. But in the southern Mexican state of Oaxaca and Veracruz, where organized crime and local politicians target reporters as soon as they start covering corruption. Journalists used to be able to flee these states and seek refuge in calmer parts of the country, but Ruben Espinosa's murder in Mexico City on July 31st, after fleeing from Veracruz, showed that there is no longer any safe place in Mexico for threatened journalists. And what were some of the atrocities that marked 2015 for journalists? Obviously, the attack on Charlie Hebdo in France, the staged murder of Kenji Goto in Syria. Kenji Goto was killed on January 31st the Islamic State released a video of the Japanese reporter. He had been captured in late October 2014 while trying to cover the fighting in Syria and to locate Haruna Yukawa, a Japanese journalist who was executed a week before Goto. In a macabre performance similar to previous executions of foreign journalists, the video showed a masked executioner address the Japanese Prime Minister directly, announcing that Goto's execution was a reprisal for Japanese participation in the international coalition against the Islamic State. Non-state groups are currently holding 10 foreign journalists who are not citizens of the country where they were captured. Also shocking earlier this year was the massacre of bloggers in Bangladesh. 4 people who have blogs, or rather had blogs, were hacked to death in Bangladesh earlier this year. There's more to that little snippet there from Reporters Without Borders. Ruben Espinosa's murder in Mexico, which I spoke briefly about. There's a paragraph write-up on that. And then Hindia Mohammed, the latest media victim in Somalia. A Somali national radio and TV journalist, Hindia Mohammed, was one of the 2 women to be killed this year because of their media work. She was fatally injured by a bomb planted in her car in Mogadishu on December 3rd. Her death bore the hallmarks of an operation by the rebel militia Al-Shabaab. Her husband, a fellow journalist, Liban Ali Noor, was killed in September 2012 in a bombing claimed by Al-Shabaab. The impunity for crimes of violence against journalists in Somalia just encourages more murder of this kind. Reporters Without Borders has repeatedly urged the Somali authorities to ensure that these attacks are investigated in a thorough and independent manner so that those responsible are brought to justice, but the safety of journalists is still not a priority for the Somali government. And then I know that I've talked about the journalists that are being held captive or otherwise detained by a government, which is essentially being held captive. But this report here from Reporters Without Borders again goes over those numbers. There are 200, or not 200, I'm sorry, my dyslexia hit me there. There are 23 journalists being detained in China, 22 in Egypt, 18 in Iran, 15 in Eritrea, 9 in Turkey. The remaining 66 journalists that are currently detained by a government are somewhere else in the world. Journalists held hostage by non-state groups, 26 in Syria, 13 in Yemen, 10 in Iraq, and 5 in Libya. The remaining journalists are being held hostage somewhere throughout the world. And then Reporters Without Borders does have a plan here, or they have something that they title Giving Journalists Better Protections. They have addressed several recommendations to the UN Security General, or rather the Secretary General, the UN Security Council, and the UN General Assembly for improving the mechanisms for protecting journalists throughout the world. And they have that here on page 10 of this report. But I don't necessarily expect the UN to do anything because the UN violates rights as well. Right? Hey, don't forget, every Wednesday I answer your questions. Send those over AMA at FTVRadio.com.